For the past few years, during Invictus launch week it's been possible to tour the UEES Warhammer, an active service Javelin class destroyer. And it's been fantastic to make the trip every year and be reminded of how incredible this ship looks from the inside. But the tour also gives us some information about how capital ships might function in the game. So, what might we derive from the Warhammer tour? I'm Forrester, and this video will dig deep into the bowels of the Javelin to explore some possible answers. For regular viewers, this video carries the healthy speculation warning label. Whilst this channel usually focuses on the here and now, what we can see in front of us, necessarily this video explores possibilities, and so please treat it accordingly and not as an immutable premonition of exactly what will be delivered in the game. For many people, the first impression of boarding the Warhammer is one of scale. The size of this ship is something different, and incidentally, one of the things that Star Citizen's first-person perspective does a great job of impressing. Whilst impactful for those first impressions, the implications of scale begin to sink in when wandering the corridors. First off is the obvious impact that getting around the ship takes longer. With a bigger ship it takes more steps to traverse it completely, and given that many parts of the ship have a purpose, it means that there may be more walking time involved in getting around the ship. And naturally, that also creates an additional challenge to players in actually learning the layout of the ship. Whilst there are some helpful signposts that can prompt to an extent, for a ship this large, just navigating the internals is likely to require at least a little knowledge of the ship. Moreover, these larger ships are more vulnerable to boarding action, where a nefarious player could make their way aboard and have any one of a number of places to hide and maneuver. Even for a well-trained crew, keeping the intended entry points secure, this poses a challenge, as players have repeatedly proven their ability to cheese their way through ships in unexpected ways. So for a crew on these big ships, setting their respawn to the onboard bed and carrying some personal weapons aboard in the armory is likely going to be important. Finally, on scale, the size of the Warhammer shows just how much development work is involved in building these large capital ships. It's no surprise that on a Star Citizen livestream recently, the ship design teams were talking about how delivering 1 or 2 capital ships per year would be a good outcome given the amount of work involved. Given that at time of recording it's 2023, that could conceivably suggest that without additional resource, it could be well beyond the end of the decade before all of the currently announced capital ships are completed and available for players in-game, which may not be what some backers would want to hear. Then there's the gameplay aboard these big ships. Some of it is actually quite easy to imagine, as players will be quite familiar with the pilot role and even the turret gunner role. And yes, it's not too much of a stretch to imagine players enjoying manning the turrets on a big ship like the Javelin, as anybody who has flown a fully crewed Hammerhead might attest to. But what might gameplay be outside of these well-known roles? Perhaps something for engineering or repair, perhaps medical, managing cargo, maybe a bit of electronic warfare. The truth is, it's hard to know. Whilst there are materials out there that talk about some of the crew stations aboard the Javelin, they tend to be more from a story-driven element rather than a gameplay element. For example, whilst there's a science station mentioned on the bridge, is that something that's likely to be manned at all times when in player hands, or something that will be highly situational and sparsely used? What might that even look like as a gameplay station? And this is where some of the tension between story and multiplayer gameplay comes in. Some of these larger ships, the Javelin included, are story settings for the Squadron 42 campaign. For players who get a buzz out of the immersiveness of Star Citizen, that's potentially a really good thing, as in the single player story, these platform ships are likely to feel organic, busy environments with lots of people aboard doing the various jobs that need doing. But translating that realism to interesting gameplay doesn't always work out, as whilst sitting at the hangar control station all day and managing ships departing and landing aboard is a useful and potentially realistic military function, it may not be the most engaging gameplay for some players. And sometimes the art of storytelling has an impact on design choices too. The Starfarer is a good example of this. As a story environment, the Starfarer is a good ship. It has a purpose, a narrative, and a complexity to it that offers a lot of story choices. There are little crawlways for when things are broken down and players can traverse through them to fix things up. There are areas aboard to give variety for key activities like the flight cockpit, engineering areas, and habitation spaces. And for when things go wrong, there are various ingress and egress points, long corridors and switchbacks for interesting fights aboard. So missions that involve the Starfarer can be really interesting. But anybody who has been aboard may attest that doesn't make for a great gameplay environment. Getting around the ship is really clunky, it's needlessly complicated, and easy to get lost. And so for many of these capital ships that are expected to be used in the Squadron 42 campaign, it creates a potential challenge to port across to the PU. That can be seen on the Javelin in-game. To get aboard, you cross through into the docking port area, which looks designed to have a naval officer in a little room to check people as they arrive. But when it's all empty, nobody in sight, it just feels a bit strange. Likewise for the huge galley, which feels realistic for a ship of this size, and quite possibly in the Squadron 42 setting is a fantastic place for meeting the crew, seeing a busy, bustling off-duty area. But as an empty setting in the PU has a very different impact. But you can just get NPC crew, right? Well, maybe. To be clear, many capital ships are explicitly sold as requiring a group of players and not to be soloed. The official page for the Javelin destroyer talks about being intended for group play, and so clearly that was the original plan. But there have also been talks about AI blades and NPC characters that players might be able to use to fill out a crew, and for some tasks that might be advantageous. For example, NPC characters to act as damage control teams would give something for a player engineer to manage without having to personally fix every burned out conduit themselves. This idea of players as hero characters or officers aboard to manage the NPC or AI crew is an interesting one and might help to balance out the emptiness of these large ships. If you're more interested on this topic, you might want to watch the Should Players Be Able to Fly as Star Citizen Capital Ship on Their Own video on this channel. But there are still a lot of unknowns about the true direction that Star Citizen will go in this regard. Before exploring some other unknowns, if you're finding this video interesting, you might press that like button to let me know to make similar videos in future, and equally if you're this far into this video, you might also like to subscribe to the channel so that YouTube knows to show you more videos like this. So the Javelin tour also tells us that there's a lot that we still don't know. Whilst the core role for the Javelin, combat, exists in the game, there's a lot of ancillary loops that are missing. Things like managing the cargo aboard, engineer power and repair, more detailed shield management, etc. are all missing, and will be key to giving a true capital ship experience. Contrast to the Hammerhead, for example, which is a fantastic combat platform and really fun with all of the turrets manned and firing away, but doesn't feel like a true capital ship, as there is less interplay between the different roles aboard. Moreover, for some of the larger ships, they will scale with the size of the verse. The 890 jump currently in game is a wonderful environment, but feels a little constrained by only being able to visit the Stanton system, whereas once more places are available to visit, we'll be able to lean further into its ability to sustain players over long distances and for longer times. And the same is likely to be true of other capital ships too. A bigger sandbox might also offset some of the practicalities of storing and spawning larger ships. And finally, on unknowns, there's a lot that is still off limits in the Javelin. Whilst it's interesting to walk around the ship and see different areas, there are so many more that we haven't seen. The bridge, the hangar, the cargo deck. Many of these areas are supposedly complete for Squadron 42, but aren't fully modelled in the PU version. Maybe that's to prevent spoilers for Squadron, but maybe there's a different reason. Part of what seeing these big ships in the verse tells us is how much we still don't know about how they'll work and play in the game as time goes along. All of that said, the idea of capital ship gameplay is still personally exciting, as a different experience of the game, collaborative and teamwork focused, to do something different from the day-to-day. As a reminder, these are just my thoughts, so I'll be interested to read your thoughts on these capital ships in the video comments. Hopefully this has been something a little different, but regardless, if you made it to the end, I hope you enjoyed, and as ever, thank you for watching.